When I first arrived in the USA, I thought I was living the dream. I had worked my whole life to get to this moment, leaving my small town at 17, crossing oceans, and stepping onto American soil with the hope of a better future. But the reality hit hard when people started calling me an alien. Not because of my visa status, but because I wasn't from here. Every "where are you really from?" question, every awkward moment when I spoke in my native accent, every time I was excluded from social circles, it hit me. I realized the American dream wasn't the dream they promised. It was a struggle, an uphill battle to fit into a society that often didn't want me there. The worst part? It wasn't just the language barrier or culture shock. It was the racism that made me feel like an outsider every single day. For so many of us, especially those coming from countries where opportunities are scarce, the idea of studying in the USA is a dream come true. It's the land of hope, of success, of possibilities. For years, I imagined what my life would be like here: unlimited chances, endless opportunities, and the freedom to pursue my dreams. When I got my acceptance letter to the university and the F1 visa, it felt like everything I'd ever worked for was finally paying off. I could almost hear the applause of all those back home who thought I had made it. But no one tells you what comes next. No one warns you that the American dream doesn't come with a guarantee, that it comes with its own set of struggles. At 17, leaving my hometown was both exciting and terrifying. It was my first time away from home, stepping into a new world where I didn't know anyone, didn't understand the culture fully, and most importantly, didn't realize the weight of the label I was about to carry, the label of being a foreigner, an alien. I thought I was prepared, but the emotional toll of being an outsider hit harder than I ever imagined. When I first arrived, everything felt foreign. The streets, the food, the way people interacted. It was all so different from what I was used to. I had studied English, so communication wasn't the problem, but the culture shock? That was real. In my first few weeks, I tried to make friends. I tried to join in on conversations, but it felt like I was always on the outside looking in. I'd smile, try to engage, but the looks were subtle, the "you're not from here" looks. Some would ask, "Where are you from?" And when I answered, "I'm from my country," the responses were often awkward. The conversation would shift almost immediately, and I'd find myself standing alone, unsure of where I went wrong. I couldn't understand why it was so hard to connect with people. It wasn't like I was different. I spoke English. I knew their culture. But to them, I would always be a foreigner, a stranger. But that wasn't the worst part. No one prepared me for the subtle racism that would follow me wherever I went. The comments, the assumptions, the exclusion, they became my new reality. I'll never forget one night. It was around 11 p.m., and I was walking back to my dorm after studying. The streets were quiet, and I was lost in thought, thinking about everything I had left behind and everything I was trying to build in this new country. I didn't expect what happened next. Out of nowhere, I saw flashing red and blue lights. A police car stopped right in front of me. Before I could even react, an officer stepped out and immediately pointed a gun at me. The bright light from the projector shone right into my face. My heart pounded in my chest. "Hands where I can see them! Don't move!" the officer shouted. Confused and terrified, I froze. I had no idea why I was being stopped. My mind raced. What did I do wrong? I tried to speak. "I'm a student. I go to the university. I'm just walking back to my dorm." The officer didn't listen. He barked at me to show my ID, which I did, trembling. After what felt like an eternity, he looked at it, handed it back to me without saying a word, and got back into his car. The whole encounter lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was happening because of how I looked, because I was different. That night, as I walked back to my dorm, I couldn't stop thinking, was this how they saw me? As a threat? Someone who didn't belong? Someone to be feared? That moment left me questioning everything, not just about my safety, but about my place in this country. The next big shock came when I tried to find a job. I wasn't expecting it to be easy. I knew as an international student, there would be limitations. But nothing prepared me for the constant, silent rejections that came my way. Every time I applied for a job or an internship, the process was the same. I would answer all the questions correctly, impress the interviewer with my skills, but when it came time to offer me the position, the answer was always the same. We don't hire international students or no expats. It wasn't about my abilities. It wasn't about how well I did in school. It was about my status as an immigrant, as someone who didn't belong here. I spent months sending out applications, attending interviews, doing everything I could to show I was capable, but it never mattered. The invisible wall of racism, whether overt or subtle, was always there. And when I did find part-time jobs, they were never ideal. I worked under the table, sometimes doing jobs that didn't match my qualifications, just to make ends meet. It was frustrating, watching others with fewer qualifications land better jobs simply because they didn't have to fight an extra battle to prove they were worthy. What struck me the most was the social isolation. In my classes, I would sit with a group of classmates, but the conversations always stayed superficial. I tried to join in, tried to connect, but there was always a divide. It wasn't obvious at first, but the more I observed, the clearer it became. I wasn't really part of their world. I'd hear whispers in the hallways, see people laughing, and realize they weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at something I didn't understand. Invitations to hang out never came, and when they did, I felt like I was only invited out of obligation, not out of a genuine desire for my company. People would say things like, "You don't sound like you're from there." Or they would make assumptions about where I lived, or even worse, they'd ask questions that seemed innocent but were racially charged. "What's it like over there?" they'd ask, as if my country was some distant, primitive land full of mysteries. The American dream. It's a phrase we hear all the time, a symbol of hope for so many around the world. But for international students, the dream is often a harsh reality. The opportunities are there, yes, but they are not given freely. They are earned, but not always fairly. The challenges I faced, from police harassment to social exclusion and the inability to land a job, were all a part of my journey. It wasn't just about pursuing an education. It was about surviving in a country that saw me as different. But even with all the struggles, I wouldn't change my decision to come here. Because these experiences, these moments of pain and resilience, have shaped who I am today. And maybe sharing my story will help others who feel like they are invisible, others who, like me, are labeled as aliens in a country that promises equality but sometimes falls short. We may not always fit in. We may never truly feel like we belong. But our stories matter. Our struggles matter. And maybe, just maybe, we'll change the world a little by sharing them.